my time at Chicago. So when I got to the University of Chicago, as I said, there were the theory was, it's called the Great Books theory. And in the first 2 years, everyone reads the same things, no matter what they're going to go into, so that everyone gets a general education of some kind. And then you declare your major. And the first 2 years at the University of Chicago were extremely important for me in the formation of how I think and how my activism became merged with an academic intellectual set of pursuits. And the first, and maybe if I had only one instance to recall, most important thing that happened was in my first year, about 1 month into the course, which was, I think it was called Soc 1. I'm not sure, but it wasn't sociology. It was political science and sociology and some history all in one course. And it was really philosophy, political philosophy. And because it was American, the primary theorist that they relied on to explain why America was the best place in the world, U.S., was Locke. Their problem with Hobbes was that he doesn't really believe in freedom for individuals. The state is really important. But look at how much better Locke was. Because Locke said we do have natural rights and the state is only there to enhance things, make things better. You know, this is the open carry stuff. It's all Lockean, all Lockean stuff. Now, they don't like Rousseau because they think private property is the origin of everything good, right? But they loved Locke. So we're going through his 2 treatises on government, and we're reading it, and this prof, and this is 1961, this brilliant prof who's a historian says, where did Locke get his ideas about the state of nature? Now, no one asked that question in 1961. And none of us knew. And then he proceeded to answer it. He said, from traveling shows of indigenous peoples who would come to England, from records from Jesuits and so on and so forth. So I said, second reason I went into anthropology, if I'm ever going to be a political theorist, I better know what the Indians, and in that time, that's what I would have said, are about in terms of their politics, way better than those guys did, because they didn't know anything that they were talking about. So I decided that was important. But that really influenced me greatly, to be able to think about that as a possible topic of intellectual curiosity that would be connected to something about changing the world from a political point of view. So yes, that was really important. That was Chicago. And tax was my major prof, but gosh, the name escapes me. I took archaeology from Binford, Louis Binford. So that I learned an awful lot from him. It was just starting to do that kind of work on animals and the origins of agriculture in the 7th or 8th. I don't know exactly when it was BC, but anyway, he started to do that. So I got that. I didn't find any of that stuff all that interesting. I didn't find anthropology all that interesting. It was just that it had this possibility of being able to do something in the world that I kept on holding on to. So tax was my guy. So that was Chicago, as I remember it, from an anthropology point of view. And then in my last year, I took a course which, if you read my work now, you will see how greatly it influenced me, with a man named Mark Galanter, who was the founder of the sociology of law concept, and he taught this course on American constitutional law from a sociological perspective. And he taught me how to read court cases, basically, and how to read them from a sociological point of view. And that has really, really served me well as I've done my work. Yeah. Okay. Now, the second thing was my field work, the slavey music. Okay. Well, we got to Wrigley, which is where I went in the Northwest Territories, my wife and I. I'm 26 and she's 24, so we're quite young. And as I was telling you, we didn't think that we would ever finish. It was the reason we went to the Northwest Territories, the academic intellectual reason, was that I studied music transcription with Navajo, and Dene are also Dene, so I thought I'd do something comparative later on between the two, so I thought I'd have a leg up. But I also had a real fondness for Canada. I know that's hard for a lot of people to understand, but I did. I had come to Canada in 1963, so we're talking now about 1969 when I go north, but we came to Canada in 1963 when I was in part of this whole business of being involved in the folk music stuff, and went to the Mariposa Folk Festival, which was outside of Toronto. Really loved it. Ended up involved with a Canadian woman who I didn't subsequently marry, and she came back to Chicago with me, and then I went back to Toronto for another summer. I played the guitar around. I just hung out. I really liked it, and I liked it because I liked London, and it was kind of a little bit more like London than like New York, and I wasn't really happy with New York. It's specifically the violence aspect of it. Even though I'm a New Yorker, I didn't like that, and Toronto seemed peaceful, and London seemed peaceful, so I liked that aspect. So anyway, so I said to Margaret, well, we're going to go. That's my wife. I said to Margaret, well, let's go to Canada. Really, let's do that. So she said, sure. So we went up to the Northwest Territories, and at that time, the communication system with the North, you probably was like being in Africa. Not in, I mean, I don't know what Africa's like, so this is my imaginary of Africa. But in the imaginary of Africa, but not out of contact with everything and everybody, but like at the edges of where you could do communications, right? So we ended up in this town called Wrigley, which was 150 people when they were all there. There was no road in. In the winter, if you had courage, you could drive something in there, but there was no road in. There was no telephone line. You had to use the radio phone if you want to get out. There was a plane twice a month, if you were lucky. There was no RCMP. So these people were like living there, that certainly marginally attached to whatever the state was really pushing at them. Some pressure on their economy, on their traditional economy, because the fur prices had gone down. A lot of people were being moved into town to get an education because they thought that the old way of life was over. But people really did not come across as angry. things. They came across more as, oh, we can accommodate this. It's not really central in our lives, all of these things. At least that was the impression. And, I've been friends with these people for almost 50 years now, and I can say that that's really, I can say that that's a good impression from my experience. So we arrived there, and I'm going to do this drum dance music. I don't really know how I'm going to do it. But I tell people that's what I'm going to do. And eventually they arranged that there'll be some dances and I can record them and so on. And I do that. And that's the information that I get from my research for my PhD. But that's not that important. Although for people who care about technological stuff, the really interesting thing from the music recording side is that, so I used a reel-to-reel, but of course, but the reel-to-reel that was then considered the standard was a Ewer, which was a small tape recorder, which had 5-inch reel tapes. But I sussed out something called a Tandberg Model 11, which had 7-inch reels and at 7.5 inches per second recorded at a quality like a Nagra, which was like the standard. So I got beautiful, beautiful sound out of it. It was just really great. I sold my car to buy that thing. And so I really care about sound engineering. I had done, because my father was in that business, and I really cared about my miking and the levels and all the rest of the stuff. So it was really anyway. So we did that. We got about 30-40 hours of tapes, and I did that. That was what I did that's what I used for my analysis. But the most important thing that happened is that within a week, my wife and I received an invitation to go to a house of an old lady. Her name was Jessie Hardesty. She was in her 80s at that time, so 1970, she was in her 80s. She had just lost her husband a year or so ago and was living at the edge of town in the house that they used to live in, and was really isolated from the community, self-isolated from the community. But for some reason, she wanted to get to know us. So we went to visit her. It turns out that this woman, not only about the smartest person I've ever met, although I was going to say there's this man who was just brilliant too. The two of the most smartest people I've ever met. But she was absolutely fluent in English. So here's someone who was in her 80s in 1970, who was fluent in English, fluent in Slavey. How did this happen, right? How did this happen? Well, what happened is that when she was a young kid living in Fort Norman, which is the community to the north, and she was an Anglican, and this is a big issue in the north, whether you're Anglican or Catholic. She was an Anglican, and the Anglican bishop saw her and said, I want to have her come live with me. So they forced her out of her community, moved her to a place about 1,500 miles away, where she grew up until she was about 15. She never said that it was terrible in any kind of way. I didn't hear anything about abuse or anything like that. But what she did say was, at 16, they said, we want you to go to this college in Manitoba, which was for Indians who were smart and might assimilate, might become teachers or something like that. And she said no. And she walked back home, which is a Dene way of saying she got back home. I don't know if everyone walked as far as they said they walked. I'm not sure they would have made it, but she might have. Well, that's the big story. We walked home. She got back to Fort Norman, found out she didn't speak her language. She was really, really ridiculed for all of this. And so she determined that she would learn her language and everything as an adult. So that's what she did. So she became bicultural in that real truest sense. And she decided to take pity on us and spend time. And like I said, you're not getting a dissertation out of me. I am just here. I got out of this place. I don't care. So I wasn't going over there with the purpose of writing things down so I'd have a dissertation, right? I was going over there because what she said was so fascinating and so important. And really what it turned out to be is she explained Mauss and Lévi-Strauss. Her knowledge of how they needed to sit and talk with her to formulate their theories. Basically, like she explained to me how everyone was related to each other, how you could manipulate the kinship system to get the goals that you wanted. And she had a knowledge of how people were related for thousands of miles up and down the Mackenzie. She knew where the, quote, mistakes had been made in the marriages so that she could trace things in different directions if it was necessary to create the conditions that you want. I saw her actually practice this with a couple of young men came in from a neighboring community, and she spent like half an hour interrogating them and all kinds of things, and then said, well, your father's brother is this one and this one and this one, so you go there, and you're and she basically said to herself, I don't want these people as part of my family, so I'll figure out sets of relations that will push them over to the periphery, right? If she liked them, she'd have figured it out a different way. And then she taught us how to live. I mean, she just instructed me on what it means to be the man and make the fire and take care of it. I still do it. I mean, no, she was a really great influence on our lives. We were impressionable at that age. So that was when I said I'm going to finish my dissertation, because there was this one moment when I said, so we'd go and speak to her, and I'd ask her a question. I could use the Lévi-Strauss. Like, she was, first of all, amazed that anyone would understand the difference between cross cousin and parallel cousin, especially, a white person, but just in general, or a man, would really understand this much, and not at all. That's what I forgot about Radcliffe Brown, and not at all about that I would understand the importance of classificatory, to use that framing, of cross cousins and how you can manipulate, and like Lévi-Strauss kind of gives you the basics of what the rules are. He doesn't really tell you how to play the game, but he does kind of give you the basics. And if people actually act like that, we'd be robots, right? Everyone follows Lévi-Strauss's rules, and we're robots. No one does that. But he does give you the rules that people are playing with. So yeah, so she was really pretty amazed at that. But so I'd say, well, Frédéric is now going out with whoever, and she would say, this is just like one example, and she'd say, oh, well, that's okay, because if we trace the relationship this way, it'll work out, okay? It was kind of like at that level. And she could always figure out a way, except for very few cases where she said, that would just be wrong. You can't do that. And again, it really proved Lévi-Strauss's point, because where it would be wrong had nothing to do with biology. They were parallel cousins to each other, and it didn't matter. There was no way to figure out how they could not be, and it didn't matter whether they were biological or not. If they were parallel cousins, then there was no other way. Marriage is not possible. period. No question about it. Anyway, so I would ask the question, and she would pause and do her thing, and then she would turn around and answer Margaret. She'd never answer me, so I'd ask the question. Answer Margaret. Because this is women's knowledge. So we'll just have to let that happen. It'll ring 6 times. So it'll happen again. So I said to her, okay. And I think this should do it. Yep. So I said to her, well, Jessie, why are you telling me this? If your son came and asked you this, what would you say to him? And she said, I tell him it's just gossip. And he should get on with his life. And I said, well, what if he persisted? And she said, I'd tell him who his father's brother is and who his mother's brother is, and that's all he needs to know. So I said, well, why are you telling me? She said, it's important that you understand this. And I took that as an instruction, believe it, to write my dissertation and to be serious about being an anthropologist. So that's how come I ended up writing my dissertation. Okay?
Yeah, nice story.
Mm-hmm.